Okay, so it won't go live on Twitter because we need a premium. So that's fine. Whatever.
Comedy is legal again.
Okay, we should be good. Should be good on YouTube. We should now be good on Instagram.
All right. Let's get going. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this edition of Roar Lions Roar. I'm your host, Bill DeFilippo, joined today by my co-host, Nick Polak. Nick, what's going on?
It only feels right that I have been on the podcast lately because I was, in fact, the Roar Lions Roar representative that went to the James Franklin hiring press conference. So it feels cyclical and appropriate.
Yeah, it's funny because one of the first things that happened when Franklin got hired at Penn State was, do you remember when Herb Hand was like asking about the best slice of pizza in Happy Valley?
Yes, I do.
And Herb Hand, of course, the former offensive line coach at Penn State. I was part of the group with Onward State that like helped turn the Herb Hand pizza crawl into a thing, and then we actually got a tour of Lash from Herb where we got to meet James. So our senior year at Penn State, Nick, would have been the first year of the James Franklin era, and now fast forward about 11 and a half years later, and we are doing this podcast live, and we are doing this podcast on Sunday in the aftermath of a 22-21 loss to Northwestern to knock Penn State to 3-3 in the season, 0-3 in Big Ten play. We're doing it now because James Franklin is no longer the head coach of the Penn State Nittany Lions. After 12 seasons at the helm, and after accruing a record of, I probably should have had this pulled up somewhere.
Still tied for third all time on the wins list.
That
with
Engel.
Yeah.
James Franklin is no longer the coach at Penn State. It was weird, Nick, because the speed of all of this, the whiplash of all of this, it's almost to a point where like I'm like numb to this, and it's not because of anything I feel about James Franklin. It's because when we did this podcast 15 days ago, or 14 days ago, it would have been at this point, it was about how Penn State came up just short against Oregon, but their aspirations of winning the Big Ten and winning a national title were still right there in front of them.
Yeah. It's pretty, it's jarring. It really is. It's jarring to think about. Like Penn State was a heartbeat away from playing for a national championship, however many months ago. And then I think I'm sure we'll get into it, but I think the point that you made when we were talking yesterday about how, obviously everything was always building towards this year, right? Like it for several years now, it looked at like it was building towards this year. He finally had, Franklin had finally gotten all the buy-in he wanted off the field, to use his phrase, the total alignment from the top down, the players back that he wanted, though we can talk about whether maybe we oversold the defense a bit just in terms of personnel. But I think the point that you made about how everything was building towards this year, but it was building towards that Oregon game. And when that went sideways, there was, Franklin's teams in recent years had gotten better at shaking off those big losses, but this was supposed to be different. That game was supposed to be different. That was supposed to be the catalyst to taking that next step. And they just didn't know how to respond when it didn't happen. And it's a very unfortunate microcosm of the James Franklin experience at Penn State, but obviously just magnified to an extreme degree this year. And it was shocking. It still is shocking. I'm still in shock.
Yeah, obviously, like we mentioned, this is coming off of the heels of a 22-21 home loss on homecoming to Northwestern, to bookend. I believe his first loss in Beaver Stadium as Penn State's coach was a loss to Northwestern. I'll just double check that. Yep. Saturday, September 27, 2014, Penn State lost 29-6 to Northwestern on that afternoon. So he's bookending his Big Ten career as Penn State's coach with losses to the Wildcats. And I think the place to start with this, Nick, is to wonder whether or not this was deserved and whether or not this happened at the right time. Because I almost feel like these are two different conversations where, like, one is clear, one is an easy answer. One is something we'll start with the deserved one, and then we'll get to the right time one, because I do think there's like an interesting conversation to be had there.
Yeah, the deserved question is, it's obviously hard to answer, right? Because it's kind of something that'll become easier to figure out in hindsight as well. But um, it's hard to say it's not. Wait, like because like I said, everything was building towards this year, and to lose back-to-back games the way they did, even if UCLA goes on to have a great season, which it looks like they might. They looked pretty great this week against Michigan State, but
Jerry Neuheisel being the second coming of Bill Walsh is not something I saw coming.
I know. Good for him, man. But you you can't do what Penn State just did. You can't lose these two games back to back. Even ignoring who the opponents were, you can't lose 3 games in a row in the season that was supposed to be different. It's just not something that you can be allowed to do. And when you add on the names of the opponents, that's where it becomes, yeah, like this is, it's not working. It's run its course. Northwestern is not like a horrific football team, but they're not a good one. Like you should have cakewalked. Like even if it had been difficult at times, you should have coasted to a victory in this game. And I don't think it's a lack of talent, and I didn't think UCLA was a lack of talent. It just you could feel it. You could feel that the team was not in it. And I don't think anybody in that locker room, we've seen plenty of reactions already where, guys seem to be very, apoplectic about the fact that James is gone. And that's to be expected. We know that arguably the best thing about him is the relationships he builds with his players and has built with his players. So I'm sure those guys feel terrible, and I'm sure they would all tell you that if they could have done 1% more in order to do something to change this, they would have. But that didn't show on the field the last couple of games. There was just something different. It wasn't there. So it's hard to say that it's the wrong decision because of that.
Yeah. The proof of concept of James Franklin is that he's always going to have buy-in from his teams. And the fact that wasn't there, or it didn't seem like that was there. I don't want to actually say anything because, like, I don't know, I'm some guy. When we're talking about whether or not it was deserved, the answer, like, obviously, like, this thing had ran its course. Because of the thing that you mentioned, Nick, like, it really did seem like Penn State put every single thing that it had for months and months and months into winning the Oregon game and getting the chance to change the narrative around the program. And when that didn't happen, the free fall started. And even if I thought a free fall was possible, I didn't think it was going to be like this. Even if they were grimy wins over Northwestern and UCLA, I did not think the bottom was just going to fall out. In part because of all the stuff about alignment that got mentioned and how Penn State and James finally gave James Franklin every single thing that he wanted, from Neely Bendapudi to Pat Kraft to all the stuff about how he ran his program. What this does tell me here, and again, this isn't based on any reporting, this is just based off of like vibes in this situation. This tells me, to that last conversation that we had, I really wonder how sold Pat Kraft was, just like generally, on James Franklin coaching his football program. Because one thing I fully believe is that if you think you have your guy, you back him through hell or high water. And coming into this season, the worst case scenario for Penn State was like 9 wins. The worst case scenario for Penn State now looks like they're not going to make a bowl. And if the worst case scenario for Penn State was 9 wins, and maybe there's not a ton of appetite to really go all in on the James Franklin thing. Maybe you give him a contract extension. Maybe he stays on his current contract where he's like the 17th highest paid coach in America or something. It kind of makes sense when you think about that Pat Kraft would suddenly go, I'm just not all in on the James Franklin experience. Like, the James Franklin as our coach experience right now, when he has gotten every single thing that he wants, it is just not tenable to continue this way, which is why Penn State is eating the second largest buyout in the history of the sport at, 50, 55 million, whatever the number actually comes out to. Have the ESPN store owed more than 49 million. There you go. The question then, Nick, becomes, do you think this was the right time to fire James Franklin on the heels of these two losses, not before the bye, not before the end of the season, not before, this or this or this would have triggered the buyout to become a little bit lower? I think the answer is yes, but I do think there might be a little more nuance in that.
Yeah, the only thing, and I wanted to pop Chris's comment up here. Chris, we will talk about how they can afford this as well. I think the answer to whether the timing was right, I think there are a lot of questions that we'll never know the answer to about, how would this team have looked going into Kinnick next week with James Franklin still at the helm? How would they have looked going into Columbus? What would it have felt like coming back to Beaver Stadium? I don't know if that was ever on the table. I think, to your point about the bye week, was probably the last stop on the train, so to speak. But I can't say I think it was the wrong time. Because what else is there to screw with at this point? It's a sinking ship, and maybe the just change in the voice at the top with Terry Smith now taking over as the interim, maybe that'll be enough to just jar guys into doing something a little bit different this week at Kinnick. Like, it's an impossible question to answer, obviously, especially from our vantage point. But the way I would phrase it is, I can't say it was the wrong time.
I think that's totally reasonable. The one thing that I fully believe is that trying to see this through to the end of the year was becoming increasingly untenable. Neither of us were at the game yesterday, but we both know people who went to the game, and the fact that the main thing that I heard over and over from people who attended was, even forgetting like boos or fire Franklin chants or anything like that, there was just like a sense of malaise and a sense of going through the motions among the fan base that, like, you need to root that out.
Did you not feel that watching? I was bored. I can't remember the last time I was that bored watching a Penn State football game.
Yeah. And you have to root that out as soon as you possibly can, in whatever form or fashion that takes. You have to root that out, which is to say, I think this is the right time. I probably would have lived if they gave Franklin one more game and they get to the bye week and they hand things over to Terry Smith. And then Terry gets 2 weeks before they go into Columbus to try and shift the vibe around before, and not have to worry about your first week as the interim head coach of your alma mater being a road trip to like the little shop of horrors in the Big Ten. You know what I mean? But ultimately, like, I kind of think that just the fact that we're even having the conversation of when is the right time, like, I'm a child of divorce. I know that when, like, I know that when your parents are splitting up, even if they get back together, they're going to be splitting up forever. Like, that's just how this stuff works. Like, when you get to the point where you're thinking about it being over and you're debating like the little bits and pieces of it being over, it's over. Like, at that point, there is no coming back from this. At some point, it is very clear that Terry Smith was going to be Penn State's coach. At some point, they just needed something to give a little shot in the arm to the programs, to the fan base, and to let the fan base know, we are taking your concerns seriously. We hear you. We see you. What is happening now is unacceptable. we believe that we are one of the programs that is best positioned to get whoever we want the next coach to be, Nick. And now, like, Penn State is going to have October, like 2-3 months to survey the landscape, consider who they want, even if they just end up hiring Matt Rule because he's best friends with Pat Kraft. Like, there's no point in delaying it any longer, and I do get that. It stinks for Terry Smith. It stinks for all the players that they now have to go through this next week before they go to Kinnick. Other side of it, you can't really fire James Franklin after a win if he's able to pull a rabbit out of his hat in Kinnick Stadium. So, at this point, it sucks, dude. Like, it really does suck that things had to end this way.
Yeah, absolutely. And real quick, thank you to everybody tuning in to watch YouTube, Instagram, trying to keep track of the comments here. Instagram, the UI is terrible, so keeping track of comments over there is a little bit tough, but thank you, absolutely. And please let us know if you like that we're doing this. We will absolutely try to keep doing it if you like the whole live thing, and we'll try to keep going on YouTube.
Which is a really funny thing for us to finally get around to doing after the program started to go into a tailspin, but that's neither here nor there.
I mean, you could argue that the whole idea of Roar Lions Roar itself was born, from the ashes of the Temple game. So tragedy really does build the strongest bonds. Yeah, I fully agree. I would have totally understood if they had kept him for the one more week for Iowa, but I agree. It's like, why? What's the point? He's walking out the door anyway. And then to Rob's comment over here on Instagram about the tunnel footage and how toxic that was. If James Frank, like, he had to stop and send his wife and daughter down that tunnel before he went because he knew how bad it was going to be and he didn't want them to have to experience that. That's one. I mean, I just, on a human level, I really, really hate that. I get it, but I really, really hate it. But that, if that is the situation you're in, it's really hard to justify keeping you even one more day. If that's how the fan base is reacting to you, like, what are you doing it for at that point? Brutal.
Yeah, and we will get to talking a little bit more about James Franklin the rest of the season, some potential names that we'd like to see take over in Happy Valley down the road. But for now, before we do that, we have some bills to pay, and we're going to do that by telling you about our friends at Home Field Apparel. Nick, do you know the jokes that I'm going to make during this ad read? Did you look in our chat?
I do. Where I saw it. I saw it.
Okay, good. Yeah. Making sure. We will just getting out ahead of that. Home Field. Anyway, we'll get to those in a second. But Home Field Apparel, premium collegiate apparel brand based out of Indianapolis. They're run by Indiana Hoosiers, so they've had a much better weekend and much better season in general than we have had. Some of the best gear that you can get your hands on if you were a college sports fan. I know Penn State game day, I'm usually wearing Home Field Apparel. Just during the week, I work from home, but I wear Home Field Apparel while I'm working, and I take meetings and Home Field Apparel stuff because it's some of the nicest stuff that you're going to be able to get your hands on in the collegiate apparel game, whether you want a t-shirt or a hoodie or a jacket or a pair of joggers or a crew neck, whatever it might be, hats, plenty of stuff. Home Field Apparel has something for you and has something for the college sports fan in your life. I'm going to quickly pull up Home Field Apparel's website and give you a sense of some of the other schools that they have in their collection of schools. Looking right now, they have Boise State, they have Detroit Mercy, they have Old Dominion, they have Murray State, they have UC Santa Cruz. They have stuff for so many schools that whether it is for you or whether it is a friend who went to another school, isn't a Penn State fan, but they just have a university that they are a fan of, you can go and make sure that you can get your hands on something from Home Field Apparel, especially with the holidays being right around the corner. Perfect way to get a gift for somebody in your life is to get them something from Home Field Apparel. Do take neither of these seriously, but if, as mentioned, they are Indiana Hoosiers, so if you would like to use the promo code SIG4PSU, Home Field will actually charge you an extra 15% on your next order, so you can go ahead and do that. I actually texted Home Field's boss and said, hey, man, can I make this joke in the podcast? And he then responded with, code RULE will get you the exact product you just ordered. So things are going really well in the college sports world. Don't actually do either of those, but do go to homefieldapparel.com and check out everything that they have in their collection of gear. Thank you, as always, to Home Field Apparel for sponsoring this podcast. They've been sponsoring us since we decided to go.
Maybe try the code though. I'm curious if they actually punched it in, if it would add 15%, just purely out of curiosity.
They should do that. They should be very spiteful. I would like it if they did that. But yeah, head to homefieldapparel.com. Check out what they got. I'm sure they have something that you or somebody else in your life would really appreciate. Nick, I want to pivot. Let's basically break this down into this next part of the podcast into three ways. One, looking back on the past. Two, looking at kind of the right now. And then we'll talk about the future in a second. And when we look back on the past, I think there's just one question that has been top of mind for me because of how kind of gnarly things ended. And it is, how will you remember the James Franklin era at Penn State? How will you remember the decade plus that James Franklin spent as the head football coach of the Nittany Lions?
Extremely, extremely fondly. I don't think there are enough words to say about all the positive things that James Franklin did for this football program, for this university at large, as a result of that. It's really easy, I think, to look back and forget what kind of state this program was in. Yeah, Bill O'Brien did a really good job for a couple of years of kind of keeping things level and righting the ship. But the roster that James Franklin took over was untenable. They were just scraping by in terms of scholarships along the offensive and defensive line. We had defensive linemen playing offensive guard. Like, this was a broken roster. And there was some talent here and there, but he walked into a situation. I think it's important to remember too how hot of a candidate James Franklin was at this time. He was the runner-up for the Texas job at that point to who was it that year?
Was that the year they hired Charlie Strong?
Yes, exactly. That was the year they hired Charlie Strong. But James Franklin was, arguably the first or second best candidate on the coaching market. And he could have taken a more stable job than what Penn State had to offer at that time. But he didn't. And he took this job and he completely revolutionized the program. This was a program stuck in the 1980s in terms of investment, in terms of how they recruited, in terms of, general expectations even. And he completely turned the entire operation on its head. This is now a program that is ready to take that next step to be among the Ohio States and the Alabamas and the Georgias into that truly elite level. They're not there yet. The goal is to find a guy next who can help them take that last step. But that last step is not possible without the work that James Franklin did to get there. The way he was able to recruit, he has changed the perception of what Penn State should be on the recruiting trail, especially in the modern era. He has changed what the expectation is on a year-by-year basis. He has changed what the expectation is in terms of being able to hire stud assistants and stud coordinators, even if this last offensive coordinator didn't quite work out. We'll get there. There is just so much that
you people have no clue how badly Nick cannot wait to crap on Andy Kotelnicki. You have no clue.
It's very, very true. There are no words to properly give credit for what James Franklin was able to do, considering how poorly it could have gone. We could be talking about this team as a team just fighting for bowl eligibility on a year-to-year basis. Was that likely? No, but it did not have to happen this way. So if you're asking me what I think about when I think back to the years of James Franklin, I think about winning the Rose Bowl. I think about winning the Fiesta Bowl. I think about winning a Big Ten championship. I think about winning the Cotton Bowl. I think about getting one win away from the college football playoff, winning a home playoff game. There are so many incredible things that he accomplished as the coach here that 95% of college football programs will never get to experience. Never. The things that he did here, the things that he accomplished here, the way he filled that trophy room, the relationships he made with his players, the impact that he's had. Penn State is one of the, if you look around the NFL, it's so hard to find a game going on where there is not a former Penn Stater making an extreme impact on every single game. That is a result of James Franklin. That is a result of his development, his recruiting, his talent identification. he deserves so much more credit than he is going to get, at least over the next couple months or so. But I hope in hindsight, and I hope that looking back, everybody is able to properly recognize and give him credit for what he was able to do as the head coach of Penn State. And I hope that they are able to find a place in their hearts and rooting interest to root for him wherever he goes next.
Yeah, I'd agree with basically all of that. Like the thing I will always come back to with James Franklin, it's the thing I always come back to with Christian Hackenberg. Funny enough, just because their two careers are so intertwined and not always in the most positive way. But like James Franklin came to Penn State and took this job at a point when he didn't have to, and probably shouldn't have. Like James Franklin very much could have waited for USC, really strongly pursued Texas, Florida school, something like that, because Penn State was on the heels of the sanctions. I mean, when they lost to Maryland in his first year, they had like 43 scholarship players. And one of the scholarship players, or at least one of the or two of the scholarship players, were like former walk-ons they gave scholarships to. Like, he came into Penn State at a point when nobody, like, Penn State was on the up and up after the sanctions. Bill O'Brien kind of stemmed the tide for a bit. He was the one who got the title of being the guy after the guy with Paterno. So, was not as completely dire as like a program that got the death penalty or anything like that. But he still took it at a time when it would have been very easy for him to not take it and to say, like, we're going to lack ambition. We want the easiest hire we can. We're just going to hire the alum who played here. Like, they could have just done that, and they didn't do that. And he didn't do that. And all credit in the world to James Franklin for doing that. Like you mentioned, he did a ton to modernize the program. It was actually funny, Nick. I probably get more mad about the USMNT than I do any other team that I like. And I couldn't help, and it's going to sound like an insult, I promise it's not. I couldn't help but think about Jurgen Klinsmann when he was in charge of the USMNT, and how, he wasn't always the most tactically astute guy. He wasn't, he had his mistakes in games, whatever. But one thing Klinsmann was very good at was pointing out all the things that needed to be better and being uncompromising in making sure they got that. And for how annoying all the alignment stuff was with Franklin, and don't get me wrong, like, some of that stuff got really annoying. Some of that stuff wasn't always easy to listen to as a Penn State fan. I think the fact that he was so willing to fight every single one of those battles and get all of the stuff that he wanted was really important for setting the program up for life after James Franklin, whether that was going to be after this year, whether it was going to be in 3 years, whether it was going to be in a decade or 20 years from now, whatever it was going to end up being. And I think that is something, you mentioned all the stuff about, like, his players loved him, sending guys to the NFL. All that is definitely true. I think that is ultimately the most important thing James Franklin did, was he knew what Penn State had to do to be able to throw haymakers with the big boys. And he got them to a point where they can now do that, and the next guy can now do that. I do think it's going to be a black eye on him that he was never able to get over that final hump. I do think his record in the biggest of games is going to be a black eye on him. I think the fact that it's probably telling that the most financially responsible escape route for everybody was Franklin leaving after this year for another job, and Penn State just didn't think it could get to that point. I'm very interested in what the job market was going to look like for James Franklin. I think it probably doesn't reflect great on him that he was fired mid-season and this year went so off the rails that it kind of makes you question the culture that, like, is his calling card.
Yeah.
But having said all of that, I think what he did leading up to this season is something that was crucial and something that was necessary. And I really do thank you for that. And we mentioned the culture stuff and how, players didn't always, it just looked different after they lost to Oregon. We
Yeah.
have seen players, we've seen players like Drew Aller, like Tony Rojas, plenty of the biggest name players on the team go to social media and post tributes to James Franklin. And I think there is something really powerful to that. But the James Franklin era now over. Was there like a single game? I'm not going to let you say the Ohio State game in 2016. Do you have like a single favorite Penn State win with James Franklin as its coach?
Oh boy. That's tough. There have been the Michigan whiteout game is probably up there. Just in that was, so fun, so cathartic. Um, any of the New Year's Six bowls, they were a blast. Even the Rose Bowl, they lost. Just an incredible, like arguably that was the best single football game that a James Franklin team has ever played. The Big Ten championship, the whole 2016 season. I know it, well, not counting Ohio State then. Just the fact that I can't even pick one, I think is it speaks to how positive this era was. So many fun games, so many fun moments. Some of the best players to ever come through Penn State happened in this era. It's hard to pick one. The Cotton Bowl, just watching the pure dominance of the run game and Micah Parsons, and just that. Honestly, I would have a hard time picking one, to be honest.
Yeah, see it. One of the comments in the reply said versus Utah in the Rose Bowl was a blast. That game was really a blast, and I'm always going to like. I still get chills thinking about how Sean Clifford got a curtain call in his final game and how cool that was. I'm going to go with two games. One, obviously, Big Ten championship game 2016. Being at, I can't remember, Nick. Were you at that game?
No, I was at the Ohio State game that year, but I was not at the Big Ten championship.
Big Ten championship game. Once it became clear, once they kind of got their act together and like just feeling it in the stadium, that for me, like unbelievable. And then I've mentioned this on the pod before, but like I will always remember the Iowa game in 2016. It was their first home game. It was a night game after the Ohio State game where everyone in the stadium, like that was when everyone realized, oh, wait, these guys are good. And like it was just a party all day. It was one of the most electric environments, one of the most fun games I've ever been to. Like there was just so much fun in the James Franklin era.
How about the jitterbug KJ Hamler against Maryland game? That was a good one.
Yeah, where Maryland canceled classes on a Friday so everyone can go to the game. And then by the end of the game, Penn State students went into their student section like, oh my God, they're so good. But unfortunately, now we have to turn to the rest of the season and look forward and look through life without James Franklin as Penn State's coach. Terry Smith, of course, taking over as Penn State's interim head coach, the single most sensible guy to take over. Penn State's schedule sucks. Like the rest of this year, they're at 3-3 and 0-3 in Big Ten play. At Iowa, bye week, at Ohio State versus Indiana, at Michigan State, Nebraska at home, and then at Rutgers. There's a very, very, very easy to see world, Nick, where they do not make it to a bowl game. And when I think about the rest of the season, like number one is just like do just enough to make it to a bowl and get those extra 15 practices for Ethan Grunkemeyer and whoever else. Don't worry, we're going to be talking about Ethan Grunkemeyer and why he's starting here in a second as well. But for the rest of the season, what is like the most important thing you think for Penn State? Because they still have to go through half of their year surrounded by so much uncertainty.
Yeah, isn't it kind of interesting now looking back and remembering at the beginning of the year, people were like, well, yeah, Penn State's schedule is like fine, but if they lose those two games, are they really like a playoff caliber team? Very interesting looking at that now, thinking about the schedule. It is brutal. It's gonna be a really tough slog. I think the main thing, and it kind of ties back to James Franklin again in a way. I think the main thing I'm most curious to see is just how they play. Like, what is the if we talked a lot about all the great things that James Franklin did, we didn't get into as much about, some of the beyond these 3 games, some of the bigger reasons why he's getting the can here. And I think the one thing that connects that I'm really curious to see. I just want to see what the what the tenor of the team is on the field for this Iowa game, this Ohio State, and just see if they play loose. If you want to have one major criticism about James Franklin, going beyond record against top 10 games, whatever, we've talked ad nauseum about how silly that stat is. But if there is one thing that is true, when there's a big game, a James Franklin team generally plays pretty tight. It has always been much more of a script of play not to lose rather than play like you have nothing to lose. And that is the thing I'm most curious to see if they kind of flip a switch in that regard. If they all have this hey, we all love Terry Smith. He's been here as long as any of us. He wants us to just let it loose. Let's go let it loose. Like, I want to see if that's kind of the mindset and attitude they can take. Because the making the bowl game is obviously an important, it's you don't want to ever have a season where you don't qualify for a bowl game. But if they didn't this year, like, you would get it. They fired their coach midseason. They lost their starting quarterback midseason. It wouldn't be an inexplicable thing. So why not just play loose and have fun with it? And we'll get into Andy Kotelnicki, but if you want to do some crazy stuff, Andy Kotelnicki, now's the time to do it. Like, pull out the craziest things you can think of, and maybe for once it'll finally trick a team in your last 2 years here. Like, this is the time where they can just be free and know that, they're all quote unquote putting on auditions, whether it's for next year here or for wherever they're going to look at as they enter the portal, or for a lot of guys, the NFL. But this is your chance to just be yourself. Just shed the overly cautious kind of mindset that embodied this team in these big games, because every game is a big game now. So I'd want to see if they can make that transition.
Yeah, it's like what we've seen with UCLA, where you get that weight lifted off of you and all of a sudden things are just different. Now, Penn State's going from having a 5-star quarterback with experience under its belt to a guy who has, I think, thrown 13 passes in his career. It was something like that. But we'll get to that in 1 second. Like, I kind of hate to say it, but the rest of the season is about convincing guys to stick around, whether they're players or whether, I don't know what the coaching search is going to look like. I don't know when Penn State is going to have a sense of who their guy is. I don't know anything like that. But, like, if I am a new head coach, I'd want Stan Drayton to be my running backs coach. I'd want Jim Knowles to be, even with everything that's happened this year, I'd want Jim Knowles to be my defensive coordinator, or Terry Smith to be my cornerbacks coach, or Anthony Poindexter to be my safeties coach. There is a lot of needing to, we've seen with, the 2027 class went from a top 3 class in the nation to now nobody is in it after Franklin got fired. Like, there is a need to convince guys to stick around and convince guys that even through this storm, you get out onto the other side of it with a new head coach in here, and Penn State is going to be the best option for you. And frankly, I don't know if that's on Terry Smith. I don't know if that's on the position coaches or the coordinators. I don't know if that's on Pat Kraft. I don't know who that would be on, but that is the most important thing. And if through that you were able to kind of build like a siege mentality and go into Kinnick, and like you mentioned, Nick, play loose and play free and beat Iowa. And you play loose and free, after what I presume will be 2 pretty not fun losses to sit through against Ohio State and Indiana. But you go to East Lansing against what's been a moribund Michigan State program, and you beat them. And then you come back home for your final home game of the season against Nebraska, against a guy that you might be seeing a lot of going forward, and you beat them. And you go to Rutgers, you end out your regular season. Wouldn't you know it, Penn State is suddenly a 7-win team, which right now, Nick, oh my God, if you promised me they would be a 7-win team, do you know how excited I would be over a 7-win Penn State team that is going to the Quick Lane Bowl in Detroit or something like that? Like, with how,
Pop-Tarts or bust, baby.
yeah, with how bleak things are for the Nittany Lions, just any positive thing to hold on to going forward would be nice. And unfortunately, the one thing that I would have wanted to see the most is watching Drew Aller these last couple of games and how a coaching search impacts him specifically. Unfortunately, that's not going to happen. Aller suffered an injury while trying to run to pick up a third down against Northwestern in the fourth quarter. It could not have happened at a worse time in the game because Ethan Grunkemeyer then came on the field for one play. He got popped, turned over on downs. Penn State didn't get the ball back. Drew Aller, and then after the game, James Franklin announced to the media that Drew Aller's season is over, and in all likelihood, his collegiate career is over unless they're able to find some magical way to get him another year of eligibility. Sucks. Like, I am probably more upset with how the Drew Aller era went at Penn State, Nick, than just about anything else.
Yeah, fully agree.
Go ahead. Start talking about Andy. Start talking about Andy.
I think we're very much on the same page here that Penn State failed Drew Aller. Full stop. They failed that kid. And that's not to say that that's not to say that like Drew was perfect and that he couldn't have been better, because he missed a lot of throws. He missed some plays. Think back to the missed pass to Singleton that would have gone for a touchdown against Notre Dame that we somehow replayed here against Northwestern this week. But from the moment he got here, I thought what they did with him as a freshman was great. Getting him into the game as often as possible while Sean Clifford was the surefire starter was they nailed that. I thought they did that perfectly. But they, at no point during his career, aside from maybe the USC game on the road and maybe the Big Ten championship game against Oregon, those are probably the only times I can point to, and I can say that I think the offensive coaching staff and James Franklin by proxy there really trusted Drew Aller. At basically every other point, it just felt like they were handling him with kid gloves. They didn't want to put too much on his plate. They didn't want to make him think too much. And to me, that is a failure because you didn't give him the chance to prove that he was capable of that. And it might have taken a little bit for him to prove that he was capable of that or to become capable of that, but he just never really got the chance to do that. This year alone, he at no point this year was he given the reins to the offense to say, hey, Drew, go make a play. The only time you could say that really happened was maybe the end of the UCLA game when he was just running for his life and picking up easy yards that way and basically had to, like I said on that podcast, basically had to do it in spite of Andy Kotelnicki. I don't feel like they put him in position to succeed. And just to I do see your comment here. I'll pop it up here. I don't think that Drew Aller failed. I think that Penn State failed Drew Aller, to be clear. It's like, the whole program was built basically kind of the way we talk about NFL teams, Bill, how a lot of cases it makes a lot more sense to build the team and then find the quarterback. That's what Penn State did. They built a team and then they found their quarterback and then they stopped. They didn't do what they needed to do around him in terms of, hiring Andy Kotelnicki was a universally praised move by basically everybody, but it didn't work. And it clearly, it became pretty clear pretty soon that it was the wrong system for Drew Aller. And that's not to say he couldn't have found success in it and that Kotelnicki couldn't have called better games, but it was they're trying to put a square in a round peg hole, square peg in a round hole, whatever it is. Well, I don't know what the hole is. They were banging their heads against the wall and they were not putting him in a place where he could have found success. They got the quarterback they needed. They got the high-powered kid, the 5-star kid, the all-talented kid, and they couldn't do what they needed to do around him. They basically were the New York Jets in that way. Like they got the quarterback and then
Jesus
they didn't finish
Christ,
the
Nick.
job. They didn't finish the
Relax.
job.
I'm upset too, but no need to put that on us.
That's like that is the most upsetting part of all of it for me. It's like they set this kid up to, like, he is going to leave Penn State. I almost certainly go to the NFL next year because it's been 6 games now. I don't see how he's going to get a medical waiver at this point. But he's going to go to an NFL team and be a restart. Like whatever NFL team drafts him is going to know that, like, we gotta teach this kid how to play quarterback, because he didn't get that at Penn State. And you know what other teams have been saying to recruits for years, ever since Drew Aller got there? That's exactly what they've been saying to quarterback recruits when they are choosing between Penn State and another school. They're saying, look at Drew Aller. Has he gotten better? Can you prove he's gotten better? Like it is the single biggest failure of the James Franklin era, really.
I would probably agree with that. Like I've said a few times that it felt like they went into the season viewing Drew as a passenger to how they wanted their offense to operate. Like, don't get me wrong, like, I'm a big believer and you have to be able to run the ball. You got to be able to give your quarterback help with running the football, hold on to the ball, give your defense a chance. You know, all the stuff about running the ball, I'm a big fan of establishing it. I also think the centerpiece of your offense has to be your quarterback. Has to be your quarterback. And I don't think, you know, last year was a bit of an exception. And, you know, last year was also the best year that they had on offense with Drew as their quarterback, where they built it around Tyler Warren being this just like once in a lifetime freak of nature. I don't think Penn State, and here's kind of my theory on this. This is a total nonsense fan theory. It's almost like James knew that his entire tenure was going to be judged by what he did with Drew Aller and what he was able to accomplish with Drew Aller, the 5-star quarterback, the golden arm guy who was going to finally be the one to kind of get the program. You know, if Drew couldn't get the program to where they wanted to go with that guy, with your hand-picked 5-star quarterback, where are you going to go? And as a result, it was almost like they took as conservative of an approach as they possibly could with him, in that the one thing that we know about James Franklin and his approach to football is he wants games to be tight. He wants games to be close. He doesn't want to be the team that makes the major mistake. And throughout his career, if there's one thing that defined Drew Aller, it was his fear of making a mistake. I remember watching him in his first year as a starter and how many times he just did not look like a confident quarterback in the slightest. And then James Franklin would go into his press conference after games and say, Drew played a clean game. Yeah, Drew was 13 for 25 for 111 yards, but he didn't turn the ball over, and that's great. And it always felt like, in what is a reflection of my single biggest gripe about James Franklin's approach to football, everything was trying to prevent something from going wrong, instead of not one thing. Everything was about trying to prevent every possible thing that could go wrong from going wrong, instead of, what if we approach this with the mentality of, let's have this go right, which they did towards the latter half of the season last year, is when James started talking about winning games in their own terms, and it was awesome, and it was the best stretch that they had since 2000.
Fake punt against Minnesota.
The fake punt against Minnesota. Well, what was everyone remembers the fake punt, Nick. What was the last play against Minnesota?
Wasn't it a play action pass?
It was a 4th down.
Oh, no, yeah, it was Drew
4th down
pile. Yeah.
No. It was a 4th down. Drew, they fake a handoff. It was a play action pass. It was throwing the football to Tyler Warren. At any point in this season, when they had they had moments where it felt like they could have put Drew Aller in position to say, like, Drew, you're our guy. Go out there and do it. We're going to call a QB draw right here because we don't know if we could block them. We don't know what covers we're going to get. You just scamper forward as far as you can. There was a faith and a confidence in Drew Aller last year that did not seem like it was there this year. And it broke my heart because you mentioned it, a point that I really like. I'm willing to bet on him in the NFL because I think a year of sitting behind someone in the NFL, getting coached up by an NFL head coach.
Don't say you know who. Don't say you know who. Don't say you know who. Don't do it to me.
I won't. And okay, fine. I won't say you know who. We'll say, let's just say Drew goes to the Niners and sits behind Brock Purdy for a year.
Listen, even we all know the best spot is the Los Angeles Rams, and it'll kill me, and it's fine. It's fine.
A year sitting behind Matt Stafford, just having Matt Stafford like yell at him, I think would be good. And then learning like McVay's tricks to being a weird quarterback. But like, it's just sad. He showed such heart, such fight, such desire these last couple of games to try. He got a little bit too far in his own head, definitely, but that's just it now. And now it's on Ethan Grunkemeyer to lead Penn State into Kinnick and the rest of their schedule, unless they decide to go to Jackson Smolik, which I doubt they will. But, who knows? Speaking of who knows who Penn State's going to go with, Nick, let's try and wrap up this podcast with a fun experiment.
Real quick. I want to address a couple of these questions that we've had. We've had a couple different questions about how can they afford to do this, basically. Everybody knows the $50 million number for Franklin now. We have seen that it's not a lump sum. It's going to work out to about $8 million a year, something like that, for however many years. So that's basically the answer. $8 million a year for Penn State is really, really not much, especially with.
And we'll credit Audrey Snyder. She is the one who reported that it's going to be paid out in a lump sum of $8 million a year, which is a lot more manageable than cutting James one big $50 million-ish check and saying go away.
Yeah, so that's how they can, afford to go get a new head coach on top of that. It's not a lump sum, not as much of a big deal. We also had one other question on Instagram that I think is interesting we can touch on just for a second. We'll probably get more into it with a future podcast though. Sure. About what we think they should do as far as maintaining assistant coaches, some of them or none of them, going clean slate. I think we're both in agreement that one, obviously it's going to be up to whoever they hire, but I think we agree that there are several coaches on staff really anyone who comes in is going to at least be interested in keeping because they're really good coaches. Whether it's Jim Knowles as defensive coordinator, whether it's Anthony Poindexter at safety, any of those.
I'll go. We'll just go through each coach and say yes or no. Andy Kotelnicki.
No.
Yep, I would agree. I would probably encourage Andy Kotelnicki to pursue a head coaching job. Sad, man, just sad. He turned down good jobs, head coaching jobs, to come back, and like this just was really sad. Danny O'Brien, quarterbacks coach.
Leaning no, because I would prefer they hire an offensive-minded head coach who has, who is mainly thinking about the quarterback position and has an idea of whether he is filling that role himself or has somebody coming with him or somebody in mind already.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that Danny O'Brien's a young coach. He's very early in his career. I want the next coach, like you mentioned, Nick, to be someone who has like their own blueprint for quarterback play. And we'll get to that here in a second. Running backs coach Stan Drayton.
I'm inclined to keep him. He's got a great pedigree. He has a great history of doing good things. I think there are certainly legitimate questions to ask about what has happened with Nick Singleton this year, and the run game in general. But I am leaning towards, I think I would prefer to keep him.
Yeah, I'd very much want to keep Drayton. His incredible resume, and that's the thing that I'm willing to bet on and bank on moving forward in Penn State's running backs room. Wide receivers coach Marquise Hagans. One word, Nick. No. Offensive line coach Phil Trautwein, a legitimately very interesting one.
I would say yes. I think if anything, Phil Troutwine leaves for an NFL job. Though this season certainly throws some doubt into that, but I would keep him if he wants to stay.
That's my thing. Like, I almost think with how, like, I think Troutwine has spoken about wanting to coach in the NFL at some point. I can't remember off the top of my head. But I would be fine with just a clean break at that point, and just going with,
Yeah,
going with someone new there. Ty Howell, tight ends coach.
I'd
Interesting
keep.
one.
I would keep. If for not, maybe he's recruited his ass off in that at that position.
Mhm.
Um, the lack of development for Luke Reynolds this year is a little disappointing, but
Yeah.
I I would say overall keep.
Yeah, I'd probably prefer to keep a Letterman on the offensive side
Yeah.
of a Letterman, not David Letterman, on the offensive side of the ball. So I'd be fine with keeping Howell, and like tight ends coach is not exactly something where like I want them to go out and you know, get Heath Miller to coach their tight ends or something like that.
Yeah.
Other side of the football, Jim Knowles, defensive coordinator. I want to keep Jim Knowles.
I would keep as well. There's been we've seen over his last two stops now, it has taken a second for his defense to take root at his new spot. Obviously, the injury to Tony Rojas this year really threw a shade over everything, but they've gone from Manny Diaz to Tom Allen to Jim Knowles. They've been asking their linebackers to do very different things under three different guys now in 3 straight years. I think that Knowles has a, Knowles has a significant history of being arguably the best defensive coordinator in the sport. I think giving up on him after a year would be pretty silly.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with that. Defensive line coach Dion Barnes.
I would. Push comes to shove, I guess I would say keep, but I would not. I would not. I would not be sad, even in the least, to see them go somewhere else with it if they have someone in mind. Um, I think he's done some good things, but this year has been pretty disappointing for that defensive line.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with that. I'm very interested in how much of that is on Dion. But
Mhm.
I would probably lean towards keeping him. Young, up and coming coach, has
Yeah.
recruited about as well as you possibly can. So I think I'd keep him. But if you can get like someone, a Stan Drayton type with a long track record in, I would prefer, I think it's fine
Yeah.
there. Linebackers coach Dan Connor.
I think keep. The
Yeah.
word around Dan Connor from everybody is basically like this guy's a future defensive coordinator. So
Yeah.
I would say keep. And I know that it flies in the face of the linebacker play this season, but by all indications, he's really really bright guy. Obviously, very popular guy in the Penn State community. So I would keep.
Yeah, and he's not exactly like he's been dealt a very bad hand. So I'd be fine with keeping him. Then I think we could just lump Anthony Poindexter and Terry Smith together. I think they're very easy keeps.
Yep. If they want him, keep him.
Yeah, I mean, both of them are guys who could be head coaches somewhere else, and then if that happens, you navigate that situation. But I think you keep them.
Yep.
Now, Nick, let's end this with something a little more fun. Let's talk about who we want Penn State to hire. And I said to you 3 candidates you want to see Penn State pursue. I have a list of 10 guys, broken down into tiers. I'll go through my full list once you're done. But first off, before we get into this, what are you looking for in a new head coach? Like, what do you want the new head coach to be and do and specialize in?
Yeah, I think you said it. You said it really well. I want them to be an offensive minded guy. Especially, if you're planning on keeping Jim Knowles, defensive side is covered. I want them to hire an offensive minded guy who has a clear identity and we know what they want to do. Because James Franklin was very much more the CEO archetype. He didn't like I don't know what James Franklin was an offensive assistant. I don't know what his ideal offense is aside from cautious. So I want to bring in a guy that I can feel confident that there is at least something offensively that they can fall back on and always have in the back pocket. So that is first and foremost for me, offensive guy who I think another important component of it too is is willing to delegate, is willing to consider having like a GM type position to help handle some of the NIL stuff, is willing to totally pass off defense to Jim Knowles or whoever is the offense coordinator in that case. That I think is almost equally as important to me as an offensive minded guy, because it's coaching college football is a lot. It is a 24/7, 365 a day a year job, and you got to be able to take help. Not that Franco
Yeah.
didn't do that per se.
Yeah. No, for sure. I basically have it broken down like this. I want someone who is going to be more of the CEO type. I want someone who's going to delegate responsibilities. I want someone who is hands-on, but is not hands-on in a way that like things are difficult. I want an offensive background, particularly as a quarterbacks coach. And the reason that I want this is that with how volatile Penn State's offense was over the last however many years, I want someone who's going to come in, have a consistent idea of what they want their offense to do, and have a consistent blueprint for how they're going to achieve that, along with a consistent blueprint for how to maximize quarterback development. I also think that offensive coordinators, they're expensive, they're volatile, they're hot commodities, and I'd like to not have to worry about, okay, Joe Moorhead leaves, we're going to recruit Ricky Ronnie. Ricky Ronnie leaves, we're going to get Kirk Shiraka. Kirk Shiraka, Mike Yurcich, come on in. Mike Yurcich, Andy Kotelnicki, come on in. And just that constant revolving door of constant new ideas. I want consistency in all of that. And I also want guys who've been around successful head coaches who understand modern college football. I think all of that is more important than like, have you been a head coach before? If you know what to do and have a blueprint for how to do it, I'm generally going to be happy. So Nick, give me the number one guy on your list. Who is it?
I don't know if I can say he's for sure number one. I feel like for me, it's two guys really at the top, and I agree with you, Jake. It's Kenny Dillingham and Eli Drinkowitz are the two that I think are the 1A, 1B in whatever order. Two guys I think fit the criteria of what we're talking about. They've shown their ability to be really successful coaches at other programs. We've seen them experience. We've seen them. They're both offensive minded guys. They both run really fun teams, fun offenses, and they both are at programs where you can very easily say, hey, Penn State is a step up from that. SEC bias be damned. Like Penn State is a step up from Missouri and of course from Arizona State. So I think they are the two perfect candidates. I obviously still have a lot of questions about whether or not our lists even matter and whether there's only one name on it. But those for me, those are the two. Honestly, I could pick from any host of names for the third one, but it's those two stand above the rest.
Mm-hmm. My tier one is first. I want to just say two quick things. One, you're not going to hear Matt Rule's name here for either of us in all likelihood, unless Nick has something planned that I don't know. And two, I'm not going to say Curt Cignetti's name. I don't know. Nick, are you going to mention Curt Cignetti at any point during this?
I just don't see it happening. So
it's very hard for me to imagine that Pat Kraft would go to his alma mater and poach their football coach. So moving on from that, my top two, my tier one guys, current head coaches, are the exact same. They're Kenny Dillingham at number one and Eli Drinkwitz at number two. Drinkwitz has done a really good job at Missouri and has done a very good job getting people on board with Missouri football, which I think is a really important and really difficult thing. And then Dillingham, a lot of time around Mike Norvell, coached under Dan Lanning at Oregon. He's done a really good job so far at Arizona State. He's from, I believe, let me just double check. He is an Arizona State alum. He is from Phoenix. I don't know if that would be a thing that he would want to leave. But when you have a quote out there where you have said, quote, I literally spent 9 years of my life doing anything to become a coffee boy. So don't give me the, oh, it's hard to be a coach right now. Yeah, it's hard, then quit. I want that guy to be my football coach really badly. So those two are at the very top of my list, very top of Nick's list. Nick, who would be next for you?
Oh man, I really I think I like the idea of at least considering um one of the like a high profile coordinator, someone like Willie Stein from Oregon. I think that's a name that a lot of people will glob onto and talk about. So he would probably be up there on the list. Yeah.
My next tier is called Big Time Offensive Coordinators from Power 5 schools and has 3 guys on it. Mike Shanahan, the offensive coordinator in Indiana, who is a wide receivers coach, but I'm willing to look past that. Or what? Yeah, he's been a wide receivers coach. I'm willing to look past that because he has been with Signetti, I believe, for years and years. Unfortunately, he went to Pitt. I don't know if I would ever want a Pitt guy coaching Penn State. Neither here nor there. He's done an unbelievable job as the offensive coordinator in Indiana. The next two, Shannon Dawson at Miami, he has coached some unbelievable offenses. He knows how to get portal guys to commit. Say what you will about Mario Cristobal, but he knows how to run a program and, again, kind of get that buy-in. And then third, I have Will Stein, like you mentioned, from Oregon, been around Dan Lanning, interesting young offensive mind. Being at Oregon, you have an understanding of how to navigate things, has had to sell the program to transfer portal quarterback recruits. So those 3 are in my second tier, which is big time offensive coordinators from Power 5 schools. Is there anyone else you would like to mention before I go through the rest of this, Nick?
Yeah, and I'm sure some of these are the names you are going to mention, but then you have to consider guys that have been the guys that aren't those top tier of current head coaches, but other guys that are currently head coaches, guys like Matt Campbell. I don't think it's a particularly good idea, but I think he is probably on the list. Manny Diaz, I think probably at least gets a if they don't do what we think they're going to do. I think Manny Diaz at least gets a call. I think it's an interesting idea. I think he's acquitted himself pretty well at Duke, but he also could be very happy at Duke. And being that Manny Diaz is somebody that got his dream job, it went really poorly. I could see him being a little more cautious still about taking another big job like Penn State, even though he is very well liked in the Penn State community for what he did. And then I feel like I should pay homage here, not pay homage, but I should mention Greg on Instagram here mentioned that he saw whispers of Mike Elko. I don't see that happening, but sure, I'm cool with that idea.
I don't have Elko or Manny for the exact reason of not offensive minded, guys. My third tier is just called Matt Campbell, and that the only name in that tier is Matt Campbell. Background as an offensive line coach, primarily has some offensive coordinator experience, but background as an offensive line coach, again, I would prefer quarterback coach, but with how important the trenches are, I'd be fine with someone like that. He's like the bar that I think you need to clear if you're a candidate. It's like, if it is someone I want less than Matt, or I am not as high on him as Matt Campbell, that's probably a problem. That's my tier 3. My tier 4 is current FCS head coaches. One is Bob Chesney, the one guy who is a defensive-minded guy that I have, 48 years old, from Pennsylvania, defensive background, but has been just one as the coach at Salve Regina, Assumption, Holy Cross, and now currently at James Madison. And then Tim Polasek, the head coach at North Dakota State. Background as an offensive guy, has some experience coaching quarterbacks. And then obviously, if you're at North Dakota State, you're just going to win football games. And then tier 5 is my not happening tier, Nick. And there are 2 names on my not happening tier. One is Joe Brady. And I have a note here next to Joe Brady. And it is not going to be Joe Brady. Number 10, the final guy on my list, is Joe Moorhead. And the parenthetical is so I can feel something. It's not going to be either of those. If they could get an interview with Joe Brady, I would be over the goddamn moon with that. But I don't think it's going to happen. Like, gun to my head, I think it's going to be Matt Rule. I think Penn State is going to hire Matt Rule. Pat Kraft is going to hire his buddy. There's going to be the feel goods about finally getting a Penn Stater in. And we're going to essentially just run back the James Franklin years only with someone who went to State High. And I would assume, Nick, you think that is also what is going to happen.
Yeah, I do. And just to touch on those 2 guys, like if Joe Brady is, if his if he is a head coach in college before he is a head coach in the NFL, something has gone very, very wrong for Joe Brady. He is that dude is angling for NFL head coach through and through. That is exactly where he's going to go next. And Joe, listen, I love Joe Moorhead just as much as everybody else does, but it's not happening. It's just
that would not end well. That would
no,
not end
it would
well.
not. No, it would not. So yeah, I mean I need to wait and kind of feel out the landscape a little more before I make any ludicrous statements about what I would do if the hire is not Matt Rule, but it's going to be Matt Rule. Matt Rule is going to be the next head football coach at Penn State. I would be shocked if he wasn't.
I'd be very pleasantly shocked if he wasn't.
Yes, to be clear. Yes. And I listen, like, there is a world where Matt Rule is the next Penn State head football coach and things go really well. That world exists. I don't want to make it seem like we are saying, like, if when they hire Matt Rule that you should go jump off a cliff and never watch Penn State again. The world exists where it can go really well. It's just that if your whole thing about firing James Franklin is that you don't think he's the guy to take the step from great to elite, then why are you hiring Matt Rule? That is literally Matt Rule.
Basically,
it is looking at the same photo. There are no differences. They are the same guy. They are the same style of coach. I don't see them getting over the hump with Matt Rule. If they do hire him like we expect, I would love to be wrong. A lot will depend on who he hires as his coordinators. But I fully agree that I think he's most likely the next coach.
Yeah. Which, not exactly the best note to end on, but there's no good note to end this exact episode of the podcast on. Nick, any final thoughts before I send people off to their week?
Yes. Chris, nope. No Tom Brady. Nope. Not happening. LK, no John Gruden. Not happening.
Oh God.
And then we did also
John Gruden is going to coach Auburn at some point. John Gruden is going to be Auburn's Belichick. It is the most written in the stars thing that has ever happened. I guarantee.
Gross. Totally unrelated to this podcast, but Chris, I'll toss this comment up here. We did do a hockey podcast about Gavin McKenna. Go check it out. It's not on YouTube. I think we can. This has been proof that we need to start being better about getting our stuff on YouTube.
Yeah.
But we did do a podcast. Bill did a podcast specifically about Gavin McKenna. You can go find that in whatever podcast app you use. It's in there. You can find it.
Yeah.
But final thoughts on this. It's to bring it back to James Franklin. It's a bummer. It's a sad day. It's a sad day for Penn State that this just didn't go the way that we had all hoped it was going to go, the way that James Franklin hoped it was going to go, the way that the students and fans and players and everyone hoped it was going to go. It's a really tough way to see what was a really fantastic era of Penn State football end. Hopefully better things are ahead, but it doesn't take the sting off what is a really, really disappointing and sad way to see it end. But we can band together and believe that a better thing is coming.
Yeah, and here's hoping that it does, and here's hoping that the rest of this Penn State season has some moments of optimism that all of us are going to be able to get fired up about. Thank you, everyone, for listening to this edition of Roar Lions Roar. Make sure you go and subscribe wherever you go and get your podcast, whether that's Apple Podcasts or Spotify or any podcasting platform of your choice. We are there, and if you leave us a 5-star review, we would very, very much appreciate that. It looks like we'll be putting stuff back on YouTube again.
Seriously, huge thank you to everybody for tuning in. This went there was a lot more interest in this than we thought there was going to be. So thank you.
Yeah, it turns out that there's interest in your program when something bad happens. But make sure you go and subscribe to us over on the YouTube channel, and we'll start getting better about uploading to there soon. Make sure you're following us both on Twitter and on Blue Sky, where we're cracking jokes on both of those social media platforms. And one last time, thank you to our friends over at Home Field Apparel for sponsoring this edition of the podcast and every edition of the podcast. One last time, thank you everyone for listening to this edition of Roar Lions Roar. From my co-host Nick Pollock, I'm Bill DeFilippo. Take care, everyone.
Go State and go Seattle Mariners.